Every editor in Fleet Street thought that they would be reporting missile strikes overnight on Syria. And some papers were caught out a little bit. Here's the first edition of The Observer. Obama poised to strike Syria. No, it wasn't. Second edition, Obama seeks Congress vote, which was what happened. The Sunday Telegraph has probably the key headline there. Now Obama puts Syria strike on ice, and that's for at least 9 days until Congress gets back to vote. What does it mean for all of us? Well, there's some great stuff inside the papers. That's the Sunday Times we'll come back to in a moment. Mail on Sunday has a good headline there. Good headline for Cameron, that is. Obama, I'm going to copy Cameron. It's completely irrelevant. The editor is a good friend of the Prime Minister's there. Totally irrelevant. And then, good to have friends in high places. Finally, the Sunday People has got bored of Syria. Pippa to marry, it says. Though it's got a very nice little thing with Obama there. Obama forced to delay Syria strike. No, we can't, it says, of the famous phrase. Now, both of my guests, Simon Schama and Amanda Platell. Front pages there, Amanda, but we've got some great front pages over the last few days as well. I think we've chosen probably the corker.
It was extraordinary yesterday. This was the Sun's front page, which just has, well, of course they've got the holiday sale, but death notice. And this is, very few words, very stark, and that's the death notice of the special relationship. Well, a little premature, as it turns out, because now the papers are full of the special relationship regurgitating itself. But it's really interesting when you look at the Sunday papers. Here you've got The Sun, one of the biggest selling papers, Liam's £2 million baby and Paul Hollywood. You've got...
Not a lot of Syria.
No Syria whatsoever. The Sunday Mirror has a tiny little bit and nothing more. The Sunday Express...
And who is ready to prove his innocence? I have no idea who that face is. But...
He's... The Sunday Express has... could you believe it? A new twist on Diana's death and Madeleine McCann. And the Sunday People, nothing. Sunday Daily Star, nothing.
But I mean, it's probably true. Probably in September 1939 or September 1914, there were, there Neville Chamberlain to give up smoking his pipe or something like that.
But Liam Gallagher in trouble again.
That, really. But there is a lesson in this for our politicians in that there's no one more in touch with ordinary public and their constituency than editors. I can tell you, because I used to edit a newspaper. You have to be totally in touch with them, know what they're thinking, and they don't believe this war sells. They believe that people are disengaged, as the polls in the paper today show.
But for those interested in all of this, however, it's been an absolutely classic day for commentary inside the papers.
Oh,
I think
incredible.
And Simon, you've got...
Well, it's very good, and understandably, the Sundays have played sometimes to their strengths, which is British politics. All through the coverage, there's been an interesting set of editorial decisions, how much to make the story a story about a shift in balance of power between the two parties, between the government and the opposition, and how much to concentrate on the difficult homework stuff. What good would a military strike do? What is the military strike? Typically, the Sunday Telegraph is very good on the hardware issue.
Can you have surgical strikes or surgery with Tomahawk missiles?
Right, and where that's going to be.
Yes.
What missing? Do we have any pictures at all of dead babies and people with their skin being peeled off from incendiary bombs? If there is, I've missed it. But what they do really well. Here's a story about Adam Bolton in the Sunday Times, specifically about the moment where David Cameron's coming out from this defeat. And Adam Bolton describes the Prime Minister's rubbery features as unfurrowed. Actually, I don't think you can furrow rubber. So he manages to be fakely sympathetic and at the same time completely... devastatingly laconic. His eye was only... the gleam in his eye was only slightly smeared. And it's about how much of an absolutely unlooked-for upheaval. What to say about the wonderful Sun story, death notice for the special relationship, and indeed the Mail on Sunday's closeness or not to David Cameron, is that we'll see whether or not that there's this terrible moment where, whoa, France actually has a certain amount of muscle. Not the French, but now it can be said, well, this is a tutorial moment. What Obama's learned is not to do a cock-up of the immense Olympic quality magnitude that happened in the middle week.
Of all the great commentary, I think the Sunday Times has done very well today. They've got a devastating leader. Cameron lost in the fog of war, and they talk about him being like a beached whale politically.
I know, it was...
really aggressive and very well written.
And surprisingly, actually, when you think that the Sunday Times and the Sun are both the same stable, and they're really getting stuck into him. But then I think probably the least helpful intervention this week, if we can call it that, was Tony Blair, who, not enough that he comes out during the week, reminds everyone of the reasons that they, for right or wrong, are against any involvement in Syria. And he's out again on Sunday. You just think...
It's a strong final paragraph in that, though, isn't it? where he says
intervention can be uncertain and expensive and bloody, but history has taught us that inaction can merely postpone the reckoning. We haven't paid the bill for Syria yet, but we will.
Well, I think the reason why that's unhelpful is not that sometimes elder statesmen have to be sufficiently elder to shut up for an but he's in the quartet, he's involved. The reason why I think that was unhelpful is that this is not Iraq. One of the problems about what happened for people like me in Parliament was that Iraq, rather than, say, Bosnia, was the obsessive analogy of comparison, whereas this particular crisis, with all its difficult options, none of which are great, needs to be taken on its own terms. So, you know, for Tony Blair to pop up, we're going to do Iraq.
On the other side, there's remarkably little, as it were, pro-Miliband commentary in the papers today, but there's very interesting
yeah, here's a thoughtful piece by Nabila Ramdani in The Observer, which is you know, someone, a journalist who actually worked extensively in Syria until the Arab Spring, when why not? But she is saying, well, essentially the Miliband line, that we have to kind of pursue diplomatic routes. She does say something very extraordinary along those lines, which is that if the idea is to criminalise Assad, who's going to disagree with that, and then he'll be treated as an international pariah of such infamy that Russia will have nothing to do with him. Well, dream on, Nabila, I would say, in that particular case.
We could be reading out commentary on Syria all day, and some great stuff, but maybe we should move on to something else.
Well, can I actually, before we do, Andrew, is that all right? Just one shout-out for the excellence of the Sunday Telegraph's map here of just what it is. Here are the installations in Syria. This is something Sun Telegraph does, you know, maybe boys with hardware military toys, but readers want to see, I think, actually what, you know, might be the case if there's going to be a military strike. And it's just laid out very clearly. And I'm going to break my own rule by reading right at the end of a piece, again, from the Mail on Sunday by the historian Andrew Roberts, which says, our path to international irrelevance has been smoothed out for us, and a new generation is clearly keen for us to go down it, leaving human rights to the tender mercies of the Russians and the Chinese. Welcome to the most morally vacuous, pusillanimous and self-indulgent generation for half a millennium.
It's pretty crazy.
Well, Andrew is biographer of Churchill, you know, it's good to hear that, but it's good to...
Right,
have a bit of cool thoughts.
Something not about Syria.
Oh, would you like to talk about Carol Middleton?
Not enormously, but I think you're going to.
And the way she took William aside. This is, of course, you know, Kate's fabulous mum. Took William aside and said, you marry that girl, you make an honest woman of her, and it's all revealed endlessly in Mail on Sunday. But then, of course, we have the wonderful news that will hearten the nation that Pippa is to marry. And she didn't evidently want to get announce the engagement too soon because, wait for it, she didn't want to overshadow the announcement of the birth.
Yeah. It's going to be in Westminster
Modest,
Abbey.
Isn't she?
Westminster Abbey, I'm sure. St Paul's Cathedral.
Weeks ago, thinking about coming back, I assumed we'd be talking endlessly about the economy, which has been the big story, really, for the last few weeks domestically. But there's very little about the economy this week. There's a front-page story in The Observer, I think, talking about the pay gap, Amanda.
Yes, and just basically it's saying that the pay gap between the rich and the poor is even greater than it was before, and especially it's terrible among young people.
And a certain Archbishop Sentama who is campaigning on this subject.
Yes.
We'll talk to him later on.
Yes, exactly. And but apart from that, I mean, you know, you have to stretch. There was John Prescott had, you know, a thing about ditch, boom and bust housing. Maybe he knew the Chancellor was coming on because he says the Help to Buy scheme is an absolute disaster.
There is the general, well, not really, I'll say this, so I'm going to, you know, stories that ought to appear but haven't. I mean, there is the very deep issue of whether or not the recovered economy will structurally look different from the economy before it hit the credit crunch.
Well, I'll be talking to George Osborne not so eloquently about that later on, I'm sure. The other thing I can see on the table there is Seamus Heaney. The big sadness of the week for a lot of us is the death of Seamus Heaney.
Oh, yeah. Famous Seamus. We were drinking pals, and contrary to stereotypes, Seamus was not a huge boozer, but, you know, he wasn't a teetotaler. We were colleagues at Harvard together, that's when we got to know each other a bit. And he's called the greatest poet since Yeats. Sorry, and there's a beautiful piece here by Roy Foster, who's Yeats's biographer. I would actually... say he's a greater poet than Yeats, actually.
Really?
Because I would, actually. And I tell you why. Because, actually, Yeats was, you know, an astonishing intellect of a kind of fierce, sharply cut, classical mind. We know from Heaney, the Beowulf translator, and Heaney, who was interested in the classical tradition, he could do all that. This man had a mind the size and power of a planet, but he had an incredible human touch.
Yeah.
I mean, he understood the language of people on the street. Everybody out there, if you want to, please read a poem together with your family of Heaney's this evening, and read it out loud. There is music in this man's
Simon,
poetry.
that's if you can find it yesterday. I mean, it's always the same, isn't it? Someone great dies, and their books sell out. It's a pity he wasn't getting all the royalties for it when he was alive. But, you know,
when I last looked at Mandy, you could get them online.
All right, read Heaney. That's a very good way.
Yes.
Final thought, Amanda, from the papers today?
Well, we've just got a wonderful election down under in Australia, which looks as though the budgie smuggler's going to win. Looks like an absolute...
You have to explain that. Not too much detail.
The leader of the opposition is famous for being photographed. He's an Iron Man. He's like a Putin. But whereas Putin looks like this kind of ferociously, terrifically strong man.
We haven't even...
He wears these tiny Speedos. I'm sorry, I don't want to say
never seen Putin in Speedos.
And it looks as though Kevin Rudd, who of course came in very recently, is going to be absolutely trounced.
OK, well, thank you very much for that.
Speedos.
Budgie smuggler wins. Shock.